I'm also not an AOSP developer, but I do talk a lot about AOSP and Android concepts. So this presentation is just a high-level overview about a lot of things to expect in Android 15 and beyond. A lot of things I'll be talking about aren't confirmed because they are, of course, just through me looking through the AOSP documentation that's available, the partial source code that's available, looking through the developer preview 1 release, and so on and so forth. So Android 15 is here, at least the first developer preview. Google kicked off the developer preview program last month, but as usual, they haven't shared the new platform source code or most documentation for the new APIs or vendor changes. Since I don't work at Google, the amount of information I can share about some of the changes I'll be talking about in this presentation will be limited, so just keep that in mind as I go through these slides. So the timeline. Google will be sharing more detailed information about Android 15 with its partners at the upcoming Android Bootcamp, which could be taking place next month, and then with app developers at I/O in May. We'll also learn more about the release cycle throughout the Android 15 DP/beta release cycle, which goes as follows. There's Developer Preview 1 that happened February 16th, Developer Preview 2, which could be taking place any day now. There's Beta 1 in April, Beta 2 in May, Beta 3 sometime in June, Beta 4 in July, and then the final release to be determined, but the AOSP source code could happen in early September from what I heard. Android 15 will reach platform stability with Beta 3 in June 24. That's more related to app developers. That's where the APIs that are part of the system SDK and NDK, the internal APIs, and all the app-facing system behaviors are finalized. So some key information about the Android 15 release you can see on this slide right here. So who am I? I'm Mishal Rahman. I'm a tech journalist who's been covering Android since late 2015. You may have seen my work on XDA developers when they used to cover Android on websites like Esper, or more recently on Android Authority, Android Central, and Android Police. I also very frequently post my discoveries on various social media platforms. To be perfectly honest, when it comes to actually working with AOSP as a platform or discussing AOSP engineering topics, I'm sure that most of you here know far more than I do and have more experience actually working with the platform. When Chris invited me to talk at this meetup, I felt the best thing I can offer is an overview of the many, many changes that I'm expecting to see in Android 15, because, there's so many things Google is constantly working to change the Android platform every year. It's really hard to keep up with whatever they're doing, and I'm sure that's the case for even Googlers who are working on Android. So while I might not be particularly knowledgeable about the specific implementation details of anything I'll be talking about today, I hope you can at least use my talk as a springboard for you to dig into the code and learn more about what's coming in the next release yourself. So starting off, if you've ever tried to build Android 14 QPR2, which was just released earlier this month, you may have noticed that quite a few things have changed when it comes to the build process. This is because Android 14 QPR2 is Android's first trunk-stable release. Trunk-stable is the name that Google has given the project to move AOSP to a trunk-based development model. Instead of creating development branches for each major or quarterly release that are then merged to the mainline branch once in a while, Google will be working off a single main/trunk branch. The idea is that all of the code will be in one branch, which in theory means there'll be a linear history instead of the broken mess of merges that we have now. So you can see I pulled these graphics off the internet. I didn't make them myself. They just give an illustration of the difference. Of course, this isn't exactly how it applies to AOSP. Practically, Android still isn't going to be released continuously, of course, to gate the introduction of new OS features, behavior changes, bug fixes, and everything else that's in testing. Google has created a new unified feature flag system called aconfig. With aconfig, even new APIs and permissions can be feature flagged. You may see this new flagged API and Android feature flag annotation in AOSP for these cases. As you can see in the example here, we have a new API, the set power off finding ephemeral IDs method is marked as a flagged API, and it's only enabled if the powered off finding aconfig flag is enabled. And also this quarantine apps permission is only requested by this app that's in CTS if the quarantined enabled aconfig flag is enabled. So let's take an example of how aconfig is used in practice. In Android 15, there's a new feature called notification cooldown that gradually lowers the notification volume when you get many successive notifications from the same app. And I have here some screenshots of this feature from the Android 15 DP1 release. The thing about this feature is that it's already also in Android 14 QPR2, but the aconfig flag for it is disabled at build time for the QPR releases. And as you can see here, the release aconfig flag default permission build flag is set to read only in AP1A builds. This means that by default, aconfig flags that don't have a specific override set, such as the one for notification cooldown, are set to read only and can't be overridden at runtime. Read-only aconfig flags default to the disabled state unless they're explicitly set to enabled, as we'll see soon. If the release aconfig flag default permission build flag were to be set to read-write instead, then by default, aconfig flags, except for those that have the isFixed read-only set to true, would be able to be overwritten at runtime. So the aconfig flag in question for the notification cooldown feature is polite_notifications under the system UI namespace, and it's read by the polite notifications preference controller class under settings to determine whether to show the notification cooldown feature. In contrast, if you go to the platform/build/release repo under the main branch, you'll see that there are other configurations, including next, trunk/trunk food, and trunk staging. Under trunk food, there's an override for the polite notifications flag that marks it as read-write and sets it to enabled by default. So in trunk food builds, which are essentially dog food builds, the notification cooldown feature is enabled by default and can be overridden by the default device configurator app. In other words, an app that holds the right device config permission and which utilizes the device config APIs that are provided by the new config infrastructure module introduced in Android 14. A couple of more things to note. First, you may have seen Google refer to the Android 14 QPR2 release internally as 24Q1 in the AOSP Garrett. Since QPRs and the next OS release are now basically identical in terms of codebase, only differing in what features and APIs are exposed through aconfig flags, it seems that internally there's no longer a need to differentiate OS releases by dessert name. However, we'll likely still see dessert names and Android version numbers being used in user and developer-facing marketing. Anyways, Android's quarterly release cycle isn't changing. Hence, 24Q1 refers to the first quarterly release of 2024, in other words, Android 14 QPR2. 24Q2 thus refers to Android 14 QPR3, while 24Q3 refers to Android 15, and so on and so forth. One thing to note is that under the Trunk Stable project, the system vendor interface is released at Q2, whereas the system app interface is released at Q3. In other words, at Q2, the APIs which will be added to the system SDK at Q3 are not yet available. Since the system vendor interface, which is frozen at Q2, is what the modules in the vendor partition will be building against, they can't and shouldn't use those new APIs that will be added in the future. This is because using those APIs is risky because there's a chance that those APIs get removed or changed between Q2 and Q3. So for example, 2024 Q2 is technically still considered Android 14, not Android 15. So why are they doing this? Why Trunk Stable? One of the stated goals of the Trunk Stable project is to improve stability in the Android OS platform during development. We're still early days, as I just said. 24Q1, in other words, Android 14 QPR2 is the very first Trunk Stable release, and Google is still making ongoing improvements to the build process and how aconfig flags work, and they're still migrating a lot of the feature development to aconfig, so we'll have to see how much of a difference it really makes, potentially by next year, in terms of stability. Either way, the changes to how they're developing and handling new features are readily apparent. Almost every new change and feature that I'll talk about from here on out is controlled by at least one or more aconfig flag. So before I dive into some of the user-facing and new platform features, let's talk about the changes in project mainline. So what's actually new in the mainline modules? I haven't noticed any new APK or Apex modules for which updates will be handled through Google Play system updates. In other words, they'll be provided to OEMs as Google-signed pre-builts, although there are a few new potential Apex modules to be aware of, as well as many additions to existing ones, especially the connectivity module. First, there's the NFC stack. Currently, AOSP's NFC stack is provided by the platform APK, the com.android.nfc package under the packages/apps/NFC repo, and APIs are provided through the framework NFC jar file located in the framework directory. To make these updatable, Google plans to migrate both of these to a new Apex module with the package name com.android.nfc services. This has yet to happen, though, because if you look at the build flags, the build flag that actually migrates these to the NFC Apex is disabled, so you'd have to flip that yourself. For what it's worth, it's looking likely that this NFC module won't be coming in Android 15. So I just think it's worth bringing up now so you're aware of what might be happening in the future release. In addition to the new Apex module, Google is also working to update the NFC stack with support for features like NFC wireless charging, which is a kind of an odd standard that was announced a couple of years ago by the NFC standards body. Another new Apex module to be aware of is the WebView Bootstrap module. Although GMS devices already receive updates to the WebView component through Google Play, the framework APIs that apps use to integrate WebView support are not updatable. To solve this, the new WebView Bootstrap module will move classes under the following directories to a new Apex module. You can see those directories on the slide right now. Google only plans to update code in these directories in emergency situations, such as when the WebView component is unable to start. They won't be including any new functionality or API changes, but they plan to introduce some new resilience features to better detect and repair WebView crashes. That's about the extent of the details I have on this. Apparently, this will be optional in V, potentially mandatory in Android 16. Another new module is called Crash Recovery, and this will contain all the APIs related to Android's Rescue Party feature that was introduced all the way back in 8.0 Oreo that helps users recover from potential boot loops. Rescue Party detects when core system components like System Server or Persistent System app repeatedly crashes in a short period and then takes different actions, such as clearing changes to settings tables or the device config table, to see if the device can be recovered. If not, then the final step is to prompt the user to factory reset their device. This change might be coming especially because a lot of the read-write aconfig flags can be remotely overridden and persisted through the device config API. So we might see a lot of OS level changes being, dog-fooded on user devices as they're changed. Some changes that are coming to the connectivity module include a new powered off finding API, which will make it possible to locate Android devices on Google's Find My Device network even when they're powered off. These APIs will interface with the Bluetooth Finder HAL to toggle on or off the Bluetooth finding feature, as well as to send pre-computed Bluetooth beacons to the Bluetooth controller's memory. And by the way, if you notice at the bottom, after I share this presentation, you can click on the link to read more about my reporting on these features. Another new addition to the connectivity module is the remote off Apex. This refers to, I believe, a feature that Google introduced through GMS on Pixel devices called Watch Unlock. Watch Unlock can actively unlock your phone using your smartwatch, provided your watch has a secure lock screen and has been unlocked, is near your phone, and is on your wrist. This feature is part of Google Play services, but I believe this remote authentication, this remote off module is the open source AOSP implementation of this feature. Another addition is the inclusion of a Thread network stack into connectivity. Thread, if you're not aware, is a low power, low bandwidth IPv6 based wireless mesh networking technology designed for IoT devices. It's one of the key mesh networking technologies behind the Matter smart home standard. One of the key benefits of Thread versus other low powered smart home protocols is that Thread devices can communicate directly with one another. Thread-enabled devices can join an existing home network through what's called a Thread border router. And to prepare for the launch of devices with Thread radios built in, this Thread network stack for Android will allow an Android device to act as a Thread border router and allow other Thread-enabled devices to join an existing Thread home network. This is being added to the connectivity mainline module, as I mentioned. The code is already in AOSP, and Google has already backported the feature onto select Android TV OS 14 devices, as they had announced at CES earlier this year. Moving on to the media provider module, Android 15 is adding or preparing to add a native PDF viewer to the module, as well as native PDF rendering APIs that apps can access through a new Android Jetpack library. Android's existing PDF SDK is only intended for print previews, and from what app developers have told me, is quite old and janky. For example, the existing PDF SDK renders PDFs as images that you then display as pages inside your app, which is not great for accessibility as they are difficult to extract text from and read. Moving on to some interesting user-facing features that you might come across in the future. Private space. If you've ever used a Samsung device before, then you may be aware of the company's secure folder feature, which creates a secondary profile that's sandboxed from the primary user. Google is looking to add a similar feature in Android 15 dubbed Private Space. Private Space creates a secondary sandbox profile whose lifecycle is tied to the parent. All apps and data are kept separate from the primary user, and the existence as well as key stats of the private profile, such as storage use, are kept hidden unless the private profile is unlocked. Users can set a separate lock screen code or biometric authentication for the private profile, and it's accessed, as you can see in the screenshots here, through the launcher, either by searching for private space and tapping on the chip that appears, or by scrolling to the bottom and tapping to unlock. So under the hood, private space involves the creation of a new Android profile of type android.os.usertype.profile.private. The framework changes for supporting the creation of a private profile, the settings flow for creating one, as well as the launcher integration for showing a private profile should already be in AOSP. However, as I've mentioned before, almost all these changes are disabled by aconfig flags, as this is still all in development. Another major potential addition to Android 15 is bringing Bluetooth LE audio broadcasting, or Auracast as it's known by its marketing term, to the forefront. So this feature enables broadcasting audio to nearby devices using Bluetooth Low Energy without the hassle of pairing. Android has already offered a UI for starting and connecting to nearby LE audio broadcasts through a button in the media output switcher since Android 13. However, in Android 15, the UI is being revamped and a dedicated entry point is being added to the settings app in the form of an audio streams page. So I think that we could see a broader importance being placed on Bluetooth LE audio with Android 15 devices. And Google is paying more attention again to large screen devices such as tablets and foldables. One feature that has been highly anticipated is the introduction of a revamped, a true desktop mode experience. So Android has had a built-in desktop mode experience since Android 10, which is accessible by flipping the Force Desktop Mode toggle in developer options and then connecting to an external display. However, this experience was only intended to test applications on secondary launcher activities and basically testing what they might look like if they were placed into a freeform window. Since late 2022, Google's been working to revamp this experience to actually make it usable for users. They've introduced several changes to how freeform windows are handled, such as adding window captions, as you can see on the right, and including a drop-down menu with various options. They've also added a pop-up you can see on the left in the screenshot that appears when you connect a device to an external display. They've also made improvements to the USB HAL to recognize when connected cables do or don't support DisplayPort alternate mode. They've improved the taskbar and so much more. What I don't know is when this will launch. It could be Android 15, could be 15 QPR1. They have enabled DisplayPort alternate mode on their own Pixel hardware with the Pixel 8 series on the latest QPR3 beta, and I would wager that they are likely testing this desktop UI on their current and next-gen Pixel hardware. So it's possible we could see a more closer, merging between Android on phones and Android on large screens. Another change is a revamping to the chat bubble feature that was introduced in Android 11. This feature allows messaging applications to display conversations in a bubble that can be moved around on screen. However, on tablets, these bubbles are rather hard to reach because tablets are quite wide, so you ideally want to affix them to a corner, which is what this bubble bar experience will be doing. There will be a bar you can swipe up on the taskbar on the bottom right that will show this bubble bar that will allow you to switch between any active bubbles that are shown on screen. Also is a new glanceable hub that is in development. This is providing a way to access widgets from the lock screen. So on tablets that have access to the hub mode experience, such as the Pixel tablet, there will be, or at least if this launches as I expect, a panel on the right side of the lock screen that you can swipe inwards to access this glanceable hub and then add widgets, so long as the widget has the category set to keyguard. Then Android is also preparing to let users save an app pair, which is a configurable pair of apps that open in split screen multitasking mode. This app pair can be added to the launcher home screen or to the taskbar, but currently can't be added to a folder. Then there's taskbar pinning, which allows the user to switch between the old persistent taskbar experience and the newer transient taskbar experience. So the older experience was affixed to the bottom of the screen and took up the entire width of the display. The newer transient taskbar, introduced in QPR2 for Android 13, is anchored to the center and only partially takes up the width. This taskbar pinning feature can be accessed and allows the user to switch between the two freely. And a feature called lock screen note taking, playing a little video here, takes advantage of the new role introduced in Android 14 called note taking, which is disabled by default in the framework, and requires a developer option to toggle the RRO that overrides the configuration to enable it. This new note taking role is open to third-party apps that meet a few requirements. An app that's set as the default note-taking app has access to Android 14's new Capture Content for Notes API, which allows the default Notes app to insert a screenshot of the current page into a note. Although these capabilities are currently introduced in Android 14, I suspect that these may be graduated from developer options into a full-fledged feature in Android 15, and you won't have to enable a developer option or override the config anymore to enable it. So just a couple of miscellaneous ones to quickly go over. Built-in app archiving support. So the package manager in Android 15 will support sending requests to the installer of record to archive and restore applications. Archiving will only work with app stores for which developers upload in Google's Android app bundle format. The developer and/or app store needs to utilize bundle tool to generate an additional APK file called an archived APK that is the same signature as the base APK that can overwrite the base installation to reduce the asset size, but without deleting the user's data. Google Play already provides and supports app archiving, but by bringing this functionality to Package Manager and providing settings and integration, Google's paving the way for third-party app stores to support this functionality as well. Sensitive notifications. Android 15 is preparing a few security features to protect users from accidentally revealing sensitive notifications. For example, the OS will automatically redact notifications with OTP codes in them to apps that utilize Android's Notification Listener API. A new Easy Preset or Easy Read mode is being added that optimizes the Android UI for improved readability and ease of navigation. Apps may be forced to enter edge-to-edge mode, which is currently optional. Edge-to-edge mode allows apps to draw underneath system bars like the status and navigation bar, and a compat change suggests that Android 15 could force apps that target API level 35 to go edge-to-edge by default. For foldables, a new display setting may be added that lets the user swipe up to continue using the app they were using on the inner screen when they fold their device. Currently, folding the device only transitions the app if it's in full screen mode. Version 3 of the Health HAL is introducing support for reporting battery information such as a serial number and part status. These will be read by the OS through new Battery Manager System APIs. And lastly, Google is preparing to revamp the UI of the notification panel and lock screen when viewed in landscape mode on phones. Right now, the lock screen can't be rotated to landscape mode on phones at all, but this is being fixed along with a new UI for the drop-down notifications panel. As you can see, the before and after on the left for the notifications panel, and on the right, the UI for landscape mode on the lock screen. So all those features that I just talked about, these are, I suspect, being introduced. They will be in AOSP. Almost all of them are disabled by default currently. You'd have to dig around, determine which aconfig flags control them or system UI flags control them, and enable them if you want to see or introduce them into your own builds. Those are just a starting point so where you can look, you know what's available, so you can go and look yourself and enable them if you want to. Some of the other things to expect, because there's no possible way I can fit everything into this 30-minute presentation. So I have intentionally left some things out that are not in this. I've also introduced listed some of the things that I think might want to go read more on by clicking the links after the presentation. So some of these, what else to expect, you can read them right now. There's a new AID requirement, new chipsets launching with Android 15 support. Won't be allowed to define HAL interfaces in HIDL anymore. Google's working on a new version of the DeX format. There's a new security state API. There's a new requirement that's for in the VSR 15, I believe, for Vulkan UI rendering in Android 15. Google's working on a Android Glasses window manager extension SDK. There's new virtual device manager APIs for new cross-device capabilities. They're improving the UVC webcam feature introduced in Android 14. There's a new Vulkan profiles for Android that Google recently gave a presentation on. There's a new in-process software audio codecs feature that allows for running select codecs written in Rust instead of handing that over to the sandbox process. There's improvements to the Android virtualization framework, including GPU support and cross VM. There's a new updatable VM feature for AVF. There's an in-progress work to boot Android with the 16K page compatible kernel. And last but not least, I intentionally skipped over all the changes in APIs that Google publicly announced with DP1 because there's not really that much, and I think it would be more interesting to talk about some of the other things they haven't talked about. If you are interested in learning about those, you can read Google's official blog post on the Android developers blog. Okay, I know that was a lot, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. I can't guarantee I can answer like the technical aspects on how a lot of these work, but I'll try my best to answer anything that you might have.